Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the plenary session for Track 2, Ocean-Based Contributions to Carbon Dioxide Removal, or CDR. This morning, we learned about the incredible ways that the ocean and ocean-based industries can decarbonize and help restore our climate and oceans to a healthier state. Now, let's get ready to deep dive into the world of ocean-based contributions to CDR. We now know that our collective delay in decarbonization has made gigaton scale CDR a requirement to stabilize planetary warming, and it is the only tool available to us to remove legacy carbon pollution and help us return to a healthier climate. The ocean, which has played a vital role in moderating the impacts of increased carbon dioxide emissions, could be key in capturing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it safely for a long period of time. The ocean takes up about 70% of the surface area of our planet, has a natural mechanism to store lots of carbon, and doesn't compete for land, fresh water, and energy in the same way as land-based carbon dioxide removal approaches. These approaches, however, are in early stages of technology development and testing. This is why I'm excited to introduce our plenary speakers who are best placed to give us an overview of the challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Before I introduce them, let me give you a sneak peek of what's to come. Each of our speakers will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have around 10 minutes for questions. Our first speaker is Dr. Kate Moran. Kate is a professor in the Faculty of Science at the University of Victoria and the president and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada. She has led several oceanographic expeditions and has served as an assistant director in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, focusing on Arctic, polar, ocean, the deep water horizon spill, and climate policy issues. She also co-led the first deep water drilling operation in the Arctic Ocean. Our second speaker is Dr. Peter B. Menocal. I knew I'd butcher that, sorry. Peter is the president and director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He's a marine geologist and paleoclimatologist who uses deep sea ocean sediments as archives of how and why Earth's ocean and climate have changed in the past. He's received numerous awards and distinctions, including being an AGU Emiliani lecturer and a Columbia Lenfest Distinguished Faculty Award recipient. He's also co-founded Columbia's Center for Climate and Life, a climate solutions-related accelerator. Both Kate and Peter are actively engaged in the research into ocean-based CDR and will give an overview of the solutions and the ways we can pursue scientific research to meet the challenges ahead of us. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our plenary speakers. Kate.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with Peter Menocal, who I've known for a long time, and we just got to see each other after a very long time apart. I had the pleasure of being on the National Academy Committee that developed the research strategy for ocean-based carbon dioxide removal and sequestration. So the beginning of this is just to give you an overview very quickly of the work of that committee, which many of you already know, and we heard a lot about it in the 6-minute session earlier today. And of course, in that report, you see this diagram from the UN Environment Program from 2017 really describes for the first time that it's essential for us to keep the planet habitable for humans and biodiversity, to start looking at what was then called negative emission technologies. But of note is what happened last week or a week and a half ago with the report AR6 that came out, which really speaks to something even more important. And that is the fact that it's likely we're not going to stay below 1.5 degrees C, and we might not be. It might be even harder to stay below 2, which means that the need for CDR is, especially in the ocean, is critical. And I think it's important to always remind ourselves of that there's these risks that are building and building and building. These are only a few years apart, so the action has to happen. You've probably seen this diagram many times, and everyone in this room likely knows it. There's so much more carbon in the ocean and in the atmosphere. Of course, we need to go to the ocean. And of course, as was just introduced, the fact that it's remote. It's 70% of the planet. It's critical that we begin to conduct research in that area. So just to quickly remind you, there were 6 solutions that were looked at in the committee, and it was really looking at the status and the research needs and assessing them. And I'll just give you a quick example from one of them. What this is showing you is that the larger the circle, the higher priority these kind of research solutions have from the committee's perspective. And of course, ocean fertilization is high on the list, ocean alkalinity, and seaweed cultivation. Ecosystem recovery is a smaller prioritization from the CDR removal perspective, but of course it's really important for other reasons, and to be rebuilding some of our mid-ocean and deep ocean ecosystems will be important not only for the health of the ocean, but for other aspects of life in the ocean. And then there's others that have smaller potential, but more recently, since the report came out, there has been increased interest in some of the electrochemical processes through startup companies and some of the work that Ocean Visions has done. And so to give you an example of what we assessed, this is just a bullet list of nutrient fertilization, what we actually assessed in terms of that particular solution. So durability, how confident are we that it will work? Pretty confident for this example. Up to 1 gigaton per year, could be more. And are there any other effects? We don't yet know. Looking at the social considerations, this one's one of the examples where there was some rogue actors that actually went ahead and did something off the coast where I live now, and that actually put this behind many other solutions because of that insufficient social considerations. And of course, the actual monitoring and the reporting methods are not yet developed. So we've done them in the report and all of those different solutions, so you can actually compare one to the other. But what was also important was the cross-cutting consideration, legal, policy, regulatory. We heard a little bit about that from the answers of the Q&A in the 6-minute session just earlier. The social dimensions, monitoring, and of course, actually doing the reporting and the verification. So from this study, the really broad overall recommendation is we need to do research for these ocean CDR, and they should be implemented soon and now. And I congratulate Ocean Visions on moving forward with some of this work. The research programs should not be advocates of any one solution. We need to then deliver an unbiased knowledge base so that we can make decisions about what government and the private sector should invest in to actually move them forward. And of course, you'll see from Ocean Visions, they have been following some of these recommendations already. They were already doing in parallel. And again, it's really wonderful to see this group together to really begin to move forward with the recommendations from the committee. I just want to now take a deep dive to talk about what we're doing at Ocean Networks Canada. And to give you an idea of who we are, we run and operate infrastructure, ocean infrastructure of all kinds of sensors, from studying the sound of whales to geochemistry to earthquakes, tsunamis, and we even now monitor high energy particle physics and neutrinos. But what we've been doing lately through our new strategic plan, we have 3 goals, and the third one really is solutions for climate from the ocean, both adaptation and mitigation. And so this is for those of you not familiar with Canada, you can see we didn't put the border there, so we are Turtle Island after all. And so this is the infrastructure we operate. Those dashed lines go to our data system. And so we are really heavily focused on the West Coast, but are now expanding with infrastructure for monitoring in the Arctic and on the East Coast of Canada. We provide the data openly available for free for scientific research, but in our own organization, we're developing data products for public good, for helping industry, and we are really interested in helping the CDR industry grow. So you can't read all these examples, but I'll just shout out to one of our interest in climate mitigation solutions. And so one of the examples is a project that we've been leading called Solid Carbon, and it was talked about in the 6-minute talks earlier, but it's really combining existing technologies, ocean platform, direct air capture, taking that CO2, pumping it through the water column, and injecting into ocean basalt. Many of you know, in Iceland, this has been demonstrated, although it's small amounts to date because of the direct air capture volume at the moment, They, the positive aspects of this kind of solution is that the basalt has durability where CO2 reacts with it and essentially becomes the most durable sequestration solution. And because, for those of you who are marine geologists, 95% of the basalt that can do this work is in the ocean. And this is a very busy diagram, but I'm just going to focus on a few things. We have a team of people doing a feasibility study for solid carbon right now, and we're obviously looking at technical systems, and it's really an integration of systems. We want to actually demonstrate it to actually get funding to move this forward. But most importantly, we invested early on the social science and the regulatory research needed to go in parallel so we don't hit those roadblocks like the example up of Haida Gwaii with nutrient fertilization. And now our next step is to start integrating that into the carbon market. So we hope to be demonstrating this site at the Cascadia Basin, where we monitor in real time with Ocean Networks Canada and hopefully move forward, not quickly because we have to really get DAC moving to make this a reality, but to demonstrate the sequestration solution at that location. We're also trying to establish ourselves to support research to advance many of the other ocean-based carbon dioxide removal solutions that were talked about here. And so what you're seeing here is a map of some of our infrastructure off the West Coast, and that yellow blob you see it represents line P. We think that we can begin research and getting benchmark information on a wonderfully well-known part of the ocean so that in future we could potentially build on that to do nutrient fertilization experiments. We have a couple locations. We're working with Running Tide to actually deploy some seaweed so that we can begin to develop methods for monitoring, reporting, and verification. And so two of these locations are ideally suited for work like that. And of course, we're interested in actually advancing both the electrochemical and other types of alkalinity enhancement. And so one of the concepts that I've been talking about is actually doing some work in a closed sea, like the Salish Sea, to advance that kind of carbon dioxide removal and all the monitoring needed to ensure that it is actually functioning and assess its environmental impact. And then finally, on ecosystem recovery, what we're seeing here is an outline of Vancouver Island West Coast, where we're partnering with Indigenous communities to empower them with the knowledge to help do that ecosystem recovery, both in the coastal zone and as far offshore as their interests are. And now in British Columbia, many of the First Nations are actually interested in the very far offshore in the new marine protected areas. So just to close with that, I just want to mention that we have been building these Indigenous community programs in BC, in the Arctic, and now on the East Coast. And it's with this kind of relationship building, we think that the stewardship and the knowledge, we can make these decisions about CDR together with these Indigenous coastal communities. So my takeaways before I turn it over to Peter are ocean CDR must be part of the global solutions. I think that's why you're all here today. And we need to do this rapidly and ramp it up rapidly. So we need to support that research. The social, regulatory, and economic aspects are essential parts. They have to be done in parallel. And the monitoring, reporting, and verification must be ready with solutions. And that's where we think at Ocean Networks Canada, we can help move that forward. And of course, our work on the coastal community participation is a critical element. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to Peter.
Technical difficulties.
while we're waiting, let's do some Q&A with questions from the audience for Dr. Moran.
Switch in. Oh, hello. Thank you. I'm Sophie. I'm with Sustainable Ocean Alliance. I'm also in Vancouver, BC, so I love to hear about your work and have some British Columbian representation. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the collaborations you were just describing with the coastal communities, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a bit more about how those have been going, how the approach has gone.
As you know, in British Columbia, there are many, many First Nations, and so all of them are at various levels of capacity, I'll put it. So we have a team of people, including our Indigenous staff, that actually work with Indigenous communities, and for sometimes years, to actually to help to decide what technology they like to use. But for the most part, we are really working with the youth of these communities, and they're the ones that are really driving the desire for monitoring their own ocean, and each community has different priorities. So we can talk again. I can describe that to you.
Thank you.
There's a question from some online participants. Biology is very efficient at digesting excess biomass production. Do you see a role for biotech to enhance the way fertilization could work, as well as the ability to send more recalcitrant carbon-bearing material to the bottom?
Wow, that's a really serious question. Yes. For those of you who are not Canadian, I have an iron ring, which means I'm an engineer and not a biologist, but I've heard from biologists that that would be the case.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and thank you all for your forbearance on our technical issues here. I think we're all set up. Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to give a shout out to all of you for, first of all, for finishing your lunch on time and making room for this, and also for your attendance today and tomorrow. This is, when I was asked to join this meeting some months ago, I was just tremendously excited that there were actually going to be hundreds of people gathering to talk about this incredibly important topic. And so one of the outcomes that I think I would like to see from this is really an engagement of, across generations, across nations, to really dive into this research that Kate was just telling you about. So my name is Peter Menocal. I am the president and director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. And today I'd like to really talk to you a bit about what we're doing on this matter at the Woods Hole Oceanographic, but really in partnership with many other institutions indeed around the world. I'd like to thank Brad Ack and Mano Di Lorenzo, also Nikhil for a kind invitation to join. And I'm just going to begin really at the beginning and really skip over some of the details that I think many of you have heard already. I'm assuming a high level of knowledge here in the room. One of the most chilling things that I've read in my career was this sentence from the AR6 report, which was that we have delayed action so intensively on reducing carbon emissions that all pathways that limit warming to less than 1.5 degrees C, and now it looks like almost 2 degrees C, now require carbon dioxide removal. And of course, this is the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, legacy emissions in the atmosphere. And what quickly becomes very sobering is when one takes into account the scale of what's being asked of us, and hence the reason why all of us are gathered here for the next 2 days, because we hold a trump card to this potential solution. We're measuring this in gigatons of carbon, and actually Ken Bissler, a scientist here in the chemistry department at the Woods Hole Oceanographic, just shared with me another visualization of what a gigaton is. We all know those coal cars, the railway cars that pass down on the railways. 4 times around the Earth's equator is 1 gigaton. It's a tremendous amount of carbon. And so when we think about what's required to remove carbon from the atmosphere, we can think about, for example, direct air capture. This Climeworks plant in Iceland. It's tremendously important what they're doing, removing carbon. We need more of it. But it's important to keep in mind what proportion of emissions this represents for a given year's worth of emissions. It's about 3 seconds. It's a very sobering number. It's important, we need more of it, but it's a hard thing to scale. If we think about growing trees, afforestation, this proposal to grow 100 million trees, for example, it's a lot of trees, but it represents about a half an hour of carbon emissions. So when we think about the scaling of solutions for carbon dioxide removal, we have to keep in mind that we need something that can really scale and can do it quickly and safely. So when we turn to the ocean, we all know that the ocean has this tremendous reservoir of carbon. The ocean contains about 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere, and already the ocean is taking up about 25 to 30% of our emissions. And if you just do the math, that's in excess of about 3 to 3.5 months of emissions in a given year that the ocean is taking up for us, with us not doing anything. That's just Henry's Law. So the ocean really is a climate hero in this regard. And so the question that we're asking is, can the ocean do more? Is it safe? How can we tell? What are the test points for us to proceed with it or to indicate that we can't do it? And this is really the focus of a new initiative at the Woods Hole Oceanographic. As Kate mentioned in her presentation, the National Academies met they released a report last year. They had proposed a total of 5 different technologies with 3 leads that were proposed. The first looks at nutrient fertilization. This is the idea of adding a nutrient or a micronutrient such as soluble iron to the ocean to stimulate primary productivity. In the case of iron, it has 1,000 to 10,000 to 1 stoichiometry. That is, for every unit of soluble iron added to the ocean, it stimulates that many fold increase in carbon productivity and photosynthesis. Another approach is alkalinity enhancement or alkalinity management. And the third is dead simple, growing kelp, baling it up and sinking it into the deep ocean. But the roadblock to all of this, the challenge to all of this, is the need for an observational basis to address the MRV, or the monitoring, reporting, and verification of intentional carbon CDR. We are woefully unprepared to make these measurements now, to do this work now. One example of this is the Argo fleet of about 1,000 floats that we all know about in the oceans. It's tremendously successful, one of the greatest collaborations in ocean sciences. But if we look at what proportion of those are enabled, that biogeochemically enabled, that is, they're measuring pH, oxygen, and nutrients, you can barely see how many dots are on the map. We're woefully underprepared to be able to close the carbon budget with big ideas. What are the things that we can really move the needle on? We're a big institution. We're about 1,100 people. It's roughly a $300 million budget. We're scientists, engineers. We have lots of ships. We have submersibles. We have autonomous drones. It's an amazingly capable place. And so one of the topics that came up, one of the themes that came up, was we can measure the ocean. We can try to close the carbon budget of the ocean using something called, that we've been terming, the Ocean Vital Signs Network. And this is what I'd like to tell you about today. So the Ocean Vital Signs Network is a 4-dimensional, that is 3 dimensions over time, data cube in the ocean, roughly twice the size of Texas, so 1 million square kilometers, full ocean depth. This is measurement, reporting, and verification of carbon, nutrient, and ocean health parameters, always on, always connected, much in the way that we enjoy with satellite data today in the atmosphere. The trick here is to implement adaptive and intelligent sampling so that they're not just Lagrangian floats, but these are actually intelligent vehicles that can instruct each other about where to sample and where not to sample. It's a way to close the carbon and nutrient budgets and to monitor indicators of ecosystem health and function, which will become important in a moment, as you can see. In essence, this is a way to sort of turn on the lights on the hidden processes that in the deep ocean that we're presently not observing hardly at all. So when we asked ourselves at the Oceanographic, but really the larger community, to do a gap analysis, and we recruited a group of 12 of our scientists and engineers to basically do a gap analysis of the technology and the science that would be needed to provide this capability. And when we started doing an inventory of what's required, well, if we have a mooring, we need power. Well, we do this already. We have wind and solar and also wave-generated power on moorings as a result of our Ocean Observatories program. We also have the ability to dock. We have vehicles that can go out for a 2-week mission, and they can dock into a tube that's only 8 inches diameter greater than the vehicle itself. We also have the ability to transmit data, both acoustically and optically, using blue lasers. We can actually dock and then also repower using a power cable as part of the mooring. And also communications. We're working on a technology now of using 5G satellite to uplink to the Starlink network that we all know about. And lastly, we can develop adaptive missions. That is, vehicles can be intelligently deployed and on the fly. So if you put all this together, you end up having these sort of supernodes, these parking lots, if you will, these vertical parking lots where vehicles can come into and be deployed from and inform an annulus around the mooring. And collectively, this is a way to interrogate an ocean volume as a function of time. So if we were to just draw a very simple cartoon of this, this is what the measurement, reporting, and verification might look like. On the left is a classical biologic pump. On the right is, let's say, an enhanced biological pump from, let's say, nutrient enhancement. How are we going to document this carbon export to the deep sea, in particular with the deep sea, because we have residence times in the deep sea, ventilation. But the most important thing is we have to make sure that this is sound science, that it's safe for the ocean. And so we have to within the Oceanographic. We've talked with partner institutions around the world. On phase 2, which is where we are right now, we've come up with a plan for the science and the technology and the sensor and data and the communications needs attached to this and driving down the value engineering. And also what we're calling federated research projects. That is, these are individual large or of alkalinity enhancement or of kelp. So basically figure out, does it work? What are the ecosystem impacts? And how are we able to measure this? So if you think it's ambitious, I agree. It sounds ambitious. And the way we're approaching this is really with a degree of humility, which is that this problem that we're all here talking about for today and tomorrow, it's bigger than any one institution. Climate solutions. So this is an engine for not only research innovation, but also basically taking tech to market. And this is something that we're running through the oceanographic. We have actually just yesterday, I think it was, or a day before, we had a hackathon where we had 18 of our scientists and engineers there talking about how they can be deploying their technologies to serve this greater need. Philanthropy serves a very important role in this because it provides rapid funding that's also risk tolerant. That's a critical part of every one of our journeys in this space, is that we need to be able to not only secure federal funding, but also to serve high risk, high impact, high deployment funds. And lastly, I can go on for this much longer, but it's really focusing on research collaboration with other groups that are thinking the same way that we are. So actually this morning I met with Matt Long and his team from Seaworthy. Again, they're focusing on developing the modeling capabilities required for this. And also with the Ocean Frontier Institute that is also looking at a North Atlantic carbon observatory. Lastly, at least in the United States, there's been a surge in funding for CDR, mostly terrestrial, but marine is included in there as well. But we're looking at roughly a tenfold increase in federal funding for the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in the next 2 days. So I'd like to wrap up here by drawing from something we all have perhaps too much experience with, and that is lessons from COVID. I was able to participate in a meeting led by the Templeton Foundation comparing COVID and climate responses. And these are some of the common elements of things that we've experienced. And one of the reasons why we're able to be in this room together right now is that you got to get started immediately. This is such a pressing and urgent problem, we got to stop talking about it and act. We need rapid and at-scale funding that's also risk tolerant. We need to build community, and again, I want to thank the organizers for this meeting. Drive innovation, drive new ideas, obviously tolerate risk, and then these ethical considerations that we've talked about that was mentioned actually in one of the panels this morning, focusing on the ethical dimensions while we're developing the technology and the science is critically important as we make this a more inclusive and representative effort all the way around. And I'd like to just end this with a loop of some of the organisms that are down a mile deep in the ocean that we've observed with the ocean twilight zone. We have such an opportunity to lead discovery, to explore, to understand the ocean in new ways, to model it in new ways, as we're developing this capability of understanding how the ocean can help solve our climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kate, for that overview of the CDR research that's needed, the communicating the urgency and the ambitious work that your organizations are doing. We have about 10 minutes for audience questions, so if you have any questions, please come up to the microphones that are here in different locations in the room, and yeah, and then
don't be shy.
Don't be shy, yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting talks. I'm Kai Sushal from Running Tide. So, Peter, I wonder how you envision the MRV. Is it going to be just based on observations, or is the modeling an important part of it?
Thank you very much for that question, and obviously the clarification. Modeling is a fundamental part of this. As the ocean modelers know, both biological and physical, the ocean is tremendously underobserved relative to the phenomenon that we're trying to model. And so the idea is to actually link together both the observation and the observation strategy with the needs of the modeling community so that they're working hand in glove with trying to solve that problem. So it's very much a modeling component, but we're also not trying to do everything in-house just by ourselves. And so we're deliberately collaborating with leaders in this space. So for example, Seaworthy is one such group, but there are others around the world that where that talent can be brought to bear. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea Gratoli, Ohio State University. How are the iron fertilization and the nutrient fertilization components of the things that both of you talked about fundamentally different from the iron fertilization experiments of the 90s? Because those were not super efficient. So how would this new commitment and funding fundamentally change how that might work?
I mean, just a quick answer, and so not being an iron fertilizer myself, but a quick answer is that much of the sort of cowboy aspect in the way in which that was first deployed is exactly the antipode of the approach that we would be taking, which is really trying to work together with communities, work together with permitting agencies to get this done underway. But there are also other approaches. So for example, we've got a team at the Oceanographic looking at using iron 52 as a stable isotope tracer to be able to actually quantify the flux, the particle flux of algae as it makes its way down, how much of that additional productivity is making its way below the mix layer.
I know, but I thought they'd shown that not much gets down there. That's why I'm curious how it would be fundamentally better.
So you want to go?
Well, I think Ken is the expert is in the audience, but I'll start and then turn it over to Ken. But from the assessment we did at the committee was, in fact, that it has a medium to high confidence that it works. And the reason that we know that is because there's natural processes that happen that drive this already. And we know that there's export from that. But I know that Ken is moving forward with a team to develop a plan to move forward the way to actually do some solid research to advance that and decide whether or not it can go forward. I don't know, Ken, if you want to add anything there.
Thanks for that. It feels a little odd here answering this, but those early experiments were run by biologists who wanted to make increased productivity. So they kept adding iron during the month we were there, and then we left on our ship. We never actually looked at the longer term effects on sequestration. So completely successful in showing that many parts of the ocean are limited for growth of plankton. Very much never even looked or didn't have the technology to sit out there with an ocean vital science network or something that has a persistence and scaling to look at the fate of that. So that's what we're excited about. We could actually do that experiment now that we couldn't do 20 years ago.
Thank you, Ken.
Hi there, my name is Leslie Smith. I'm the director of the Deep Ocean Observing Strategy. We're a UN Ocean Decade program. And as you showed your Argo plots up there, I just wanted to bring up another Argo group, Deep Argo. So Argo and BGC Argo are only going to take us down 2,000 meters. Deep Argo has even less dots on that map, and I think that's going to be a really critical component, especially as everything we say, oh, and then it'll go to the deep sea. So, and then question for you about your vital signs network is what type of seafloor monitoring you'll be doing. A lot of stuff you showed was water column. And Kate, I don't want to leave you out. Your stuff looks super cool too. So, thank you.
Yeah, no. Thank you. Yeah, so I think the sampling strategy can be dependent upon the experiment that's being done. So in the case where you're looking at seafloor burial, that can be monitored explicitly. The idea is to make it an adaptive platform. So let's say you're looking at alkalinity enhancement. Well, that's mainly a surface alkalinity carbon system response, but you need incredibly high precision and incredibly high density because you're in a more turbulent part of the ocean. So the idea is that these vehicles could tune themselves to resolving that part of the problem. And the flip side for, let's say, ocean iron fertilization.
I think I see two people. We'll have two quick questions. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I'm Nathan Walworth, the VP of Science Strategy at Vesta. I appreciate the ocean ecosystem that you're building, especially around kind of determining what types of funding are appropriate for what stages, which I think is really important. I'd love for you to see if for you to comment just on the permitting aspects of all of this. I think permitting is actually where a lot of that funding could potentially run dry, and I know we're trying to do field trials, so I'm wondering how that might fit into the ecosystem that you both are building.
Yeah, so the way we're approaching the beginning of this, using our infrastructure for advancing the research, is to really begin with the low-hanging fruit. What can we do without the permitting, which is what we're starting with? And of course, that can move ahead, and which we'll be doing, and some of that is really just benchmarking. In Canada, there's a new organization that's part of Treasury Board that's called Regulatory Innovation. And so we've had discussions starting with them, because that's the kind of group that is set to actually allow us to move forward with this kind of experiments, because the risk to society is so high. This kind of work was done in the Great Lakes Experiment Laboratory in Ontario. It was likely before a lot of the regulations, but that was a great example of acid rain being addressed by basically a dumping research experiment. So we're having those discussions now so that we can get them moving and actually begin to do this research.
Nadia Pinardi from University of Bologna. I mean, you gave us a dream of a subsurface monitoring system, but modelers normally look also at satellite. And actually, I think that one of the key is to be complementary to satellite, and also envisage new satellites that might be pseudo-satellites, not like balloons, and so have swarms in the atmosphere. Have you thought about this?
I haven't thought about it. I think it's probably a good idea, just because it makes sense to design any observing system so that it complements the satellite data. And if the need is, I hadn't seen Peter's presentation, but it's a fantastic idea. But if the need is to ensure that you're actually complementing the surface ocean and the deep ocean observations with satellite, developing an atmospheric mobile system that could actually complement would be beautiful.
And thank you very much for that question, and I should have addressed that. Absolutely, all the satellite data that are available are part of this as an input. But one of the things we're looking into now is, what is the time and space sampling strategy that you would need to deploy given a certain energy density of a certain vehicle, so that you can basically say, what is the optimum path that we need to program into this to be able to capture the intrinsic variability of a volume of ocean. So it has like a log normal distribution as a function of water depth, let's say for chemistry or biology or physics, that the sampling strategy follows that.
Great. All right. Thank you all. Thank you to the audience for those questions. Thank you, Kate and Peter. Let's continue the discussion.
We're done?
Yes.
Oh, we got it.